Welcome back to AM Northwest. To say our next guest has had a challenging life is an understatement, really. He's now taking what he's learned from that and helping the rest of us live a better life. We welcome the author of Big Love, Scott Stabile. Good to have you with us, Scott.
Thank you, Helen.
And you've been through an immense amount of grief yourself.
Yeah.
Your parents were killed when you were quite young. Tell me what happened.
Well, it was when I was 14 years old, and my parents owned a market, in a fruit market, kind of convenience store in Detroit, and they were shot to death one morning upon entering, when they saw that one of their employees had been stabbed, and the man who stabbed the employee was still in the store. And after my father called 911, the man ended up killing them as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then 9 years later, your brother dies of an overdose.
Yes.
Of heroin.
Yes.
And then to cope with all of this, or you tell me if this is correct, to cope with all of this, you join a cult.
Well, that's a bit of a leap, I would say.
So then you tell me.
I would say the cult came in my early to mid-20s, and I moved to the Bay Area, and that was a time when I was being introduced to the world of self-help writing and spirituality writing, and learning more about love and enlightenment and peace as a guiding force in our lives, and had befriended a lot of people who all were studying under this guru. You know, they were a part of a spiritual community, and they were crediting him with helping them become more loving, more peaceful individuals. So for me, I was excited and wanted to meet this man, and ended up becoming a part of that community. And it was at that time that I was also dealing with the grief around my parents in a different way, because I had buried it for so many years as a youngster. As a 14-year-old, I didn't know how to deal with that.
Right.
You know,
what 14-year-old would?
No, exactly. So I just buried it, moved on with my life, cried once a year, buried it again. And in my 20s, I was starting to realize that when we're not really allowing for the pain of our experience, we're shutting ourselves down to deeper connections with people as well. And so that's when I really made space to just be sad and cry and feel what I was feeling, and rage, and all of these things that I think are a natural part of grieving anything. And it led me to stay connected to this community cult, the spiritual cult, as I call it, for 13 years.
And you left at some point too, though, right?
I left about
After
8 years ago, yeah, when I realized, you know, I had grown to see this guru as an enlightened master, you know, on par with a Buddha, say. This is how he presented himself. And I believed him for many years until I didn't, until I started to see that though he professed himself to be a man without ego, he was actually operating from a lot of ego, like any human being, you know, and I realized that this wasn't really the path to keep walking, that love didn't have to be unconditional love, and talking about unconditional love and being present in that. You don't have to be a part of a group like this and listening to the commands of one person to operate from that place in your life.
One of the things you talk about is to act with kindness.
Yes. Look, I talk a lot about love, but when I'm speaking about love, I'm speaking about things like kindness, which is love in action, and compassion, which is love in action, and empathy, which we're in desperate need of in our country today, you know. And for me, those are all reflective of choosing love in our lives. And I feel like this is a heavy day, you know, and this shooting in Las Vegas, and I feel like we tend to be paralyzed and feel like we can't do anything about the darkness in this world. And I just try to remind people that you can step out into your community every single day, and you can touch people with your kindness. That's where we are empowered, and how we're choosing to show up in the conversations on social media, in the interactions with our neighbors. You know, we can choose to show up with a kind heart and with an empathetic heart, and it absolutely makes a difference. And in my experience, it inspires others to meet you from that place. So we're not fueling all this rage and division with more rage and division, but we're actually taking the time to say, like, what might it be like to walk through this world in your shoes? You know what I mean? And, and what might your struggle look like? And when we come to conversations with that, it's very hard to hate the person on the opposite end of that conversation.
And choosing empathy, too.
Look, Empathy for me is the path to forgiveness. It's how I found forgiveness for the man who killed my parents.
How? That is a difficult one, to find empathy for the man who shot and killed your parents.
Well, to find forgiveness was really difficult, but it was only when I started to recognize that, you know, no human being who's operating from any place of self-worth or self-love or being seen in this world could ever kill another human being. It just doesn't happen. So when I started to connect with him as another human, and started to imagine what might his life have looked like to get to this point, that's what we need to be doing with each other, rather than just writing each other off because our opinions are different or because somebody does something terrible. You know, can we take the time to imagine, well, what has their experience been like? And that when I started to do that, I was able to view him through a completely different lens, one with compassion, and it was like forgiveness then found me, you know?
That's amazing. You also talk about being honest, which to me is a huge thing. If you're honest with everyone, life is just a bit easier.
It's a bit easier for sure, and I think that the trick for many of us is being honest with ourselves.
Sure.
You know, we're brought up with so much conditioning from the time we're infants, and we're told how we need to be and how we need to look and who we need to love and all of these things that we have to do in the world. And it's only when we start doing some self-exploration and figuring out, well, what feels right to me? Who am I really? How do I want to show up? And when we're willing to show up with that sort of honesty, one, we feel so much freedom in it. As you were saying, when you show up honestly in your life, you don't have to remember
the lies.
Right. You know, and you also create a space, I've found, you create a space for others to show up in their lives authentically as well. And it doesn't mean you're not going to be judged. We're all judged. Human beings are judgmental. But I like to say to people, like, look, you're going to be judged no matter what choices you make in your life. Let people judge you for your truth.
Right.
And you're going to feel a lot freer and a lot more at peace with yourself.
What do you mean befriend your fear?
Well, my fear was a bully for so much of my life, and I always looked at it as the one thing that kept me from living my fullest life. And then I started to recognize my fear is ultimately just trying to protect me. It doesn't always do a very good job. It tries to keep me from, you know, entering into a difficult conversation with the same vigor that it tries to keep me from running into a burning building.
Sure.
You know, it doesn't make those distinctions. It sees it all as scary. So don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. But now I have a different relationship with my fear. It feels more like a nagging little brother who's tugging at your pants and saying, don't do this, don't do that. But I kind of shoo my fear away instead of feeling like I have to listen to everything it's saying. And the more what I found in my life, Helen, is I'm afraid all the time. I was scared to death before this interview, you know what I mean? But I'm still showing up and recognizing like the fear doesn't have to stop you. You learn to move forward with your fear instead of feeling like you have to wait to become fearless, because nobody becomes fearless. It's not how life works. But we can still be fearful and still sit on this couch and talk to you and have this conversation knowing like I have butterflies going on and all of that, but here I am. It's not going to kill you. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely. Scott, thank you so much. The book again is titled Big Love. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me here.
We'll be right back with more AM Northwest. Don't go away.